Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted to have in our studio audience today a colleague from the Organization Development Network, a former board member of the Organization Development Network, and the author of a really powerful book about culture, which we're going to dig into later. But let me introduce, without any further hesitation, Dr. Shahrzad Nooravi, who has just done some amazing work, I think, in terms of thinking about culture and coaching and all of the topics that many of you in our listening audience will be familiar with and want to engage in. So, Shahrzad, welcome to Authentic Change. Again, I'm just delighted to have you here. Can you say a few words about yourself to our audience?
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Sure. My role is a business psychologist, and I work with company leaders to create really engaging workplace cultures where people want to stay, or if there are people who normally would leave pretty quickly, they would stay longer and really move forward with their best selves, with their best work, and helping create teams that are aligned across functions and an environment, a workplace environment that is reverberating with energy and positivity and bringing all of that to the customers and to the community.
Well, that's so great. And those are all topics that certainly resonate with me and will resonate with much of our audience. And I want to initially point people to strategymeetsperformance.com, which is a website where you'll learn a lot more about Shahrzad and her work and how powerful cultures start with the person. Shahrzad, I'm interested in, one of the things that we often discuss on the podcast is, and in my work with coaching clients, is how to bring more of who you are to what you do. And how does that start to happen in your framework? How do we get people to bring their best selves to organizational life?
Yeah, I love that. So there's a few things to keep in mind. One, I believe in a strengths-based approach. And when I start coaching someone, I conduct some interviews to find out what are the areas where this person really shines and does so well. And then, of course, what are some suggestions for how the person could be more effective? And I help them see what is the best of them, right? And so that's through learning about them, through what I learned from them, what I learned from the stakeholders, what I learned from personality assessments about where their natural energies are. So part of being authentic is knowing ourselves and having self-awareness. And this coaching work is something that helps do that. A second part of it is courage. It's having the courage to speak up and share our voice and share our agency, not just when we're in a room full of people who we know very well and we trust really well, but also in scenarios where it may not be as comfortable, or we hear something and it's antithesis to what we believe and we feel uncomfortable to speak up. And the question is, how can we be authentic if we don't speak up? And so when it comes to having the courage to speak up, we have to remember that every time we do, we are planting a seed. And that seed could be what helps an idea or someone else speaking up bloom later. So that is a huge part of being authentic. And then the third thing is, with time and practice, getting comfortable in our own skin and becoming confident in who we are. And, there's a series of things that we can all do in terms of our leadership and specific to each person that helps grow that confidence. And when we show up that way, then we are role modeling that behavior for others. So I'll give a quick example. And Mike, you may have had these experiences as well. When I facilitate workshops, I make it really safe and inclusive, and I let people share who they are and what they believe and what they may be experiencing in the moment. And I do the same. And sometimes people may feel moved to tears about something that they're sharing. And I think that's a huge part of being authentic. And they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And I'll say, "I think it's beautiful that something moved you. There's nothing to apologize for." And so many times in organizations, we learn from the unwritten rules that we have to suppress our emotions. We have to show up in a certain way so we appear strong. And I don't think that's authentic. And I have a colleague, she is the CEO of an IT consulting firm, and she had a terrible holiday season. A friend of hers unexpectedly passed away. And she was struggling with if she wanted to tell her staff about it. And she said, "I don't want them to see me as weak." And I think that's perpetuating a myth that showing emotions at work equals weakness. And in fact, I think it shows strength, and I think it role models humanity. And so these are some of the things that, if we are aware of it and we pay attention to it, we can be more and more authentic in the workplace.
And it's so important. You have in your newest book, you've got a great title, A Powerful Culture Starts With You. Who did you write that book for? I'm thinking about it. It's so personal about culture starting with you. Who were you thinking about? Who did you have in mind as you wrote the book?
Every leader I've worked with who has ever had doubt about their power and their ability to shift their culture despite very challenging circumstances. I found myself so many times saying, "It starts with you. What's your role in this? How might you have contributed to this situation?" And it comes from such a place of caring and wanting the person to really bring out the best in themselves and their teams and their company. And I hold myself to that same standard. And I realized over time that when each of these leaders did decide to have voice and agency and confidence in what they were doing, even if people may not be for it in the beginning, that they shifted mindsets, they shifted cultures. And that was the best title that I could think of. A powerful culture starts with you. That inner work leads to that outer success.
Agency is so important. And it really, I think at many levels, is about understanding who you are and around self-awareness. Some say that leadership begins with self-awareness. As you thought about this, you obviously touched on the topics of strategy and performance. And why relate those topics, thinking about this leadership journey that many are on?
I thought, how can I make the point that it's the operations side and the people side? And a lot of thought went into, how do we bring them together? How do we bridge strategy and performance? And therein lies the how of business. It's organization development. It's how you get the strategies, the what, the people are the how. And so it was a very OD approach, I think, at a very subconscious level when I came up with it.
I did a lot of work with Gallup surveys at various points in my careers, and I do believe that so much of engagement is within managerial control, or certainly within the sphere of managerial influence. As the world has evolved, and I know the late Ed Schein endorsed your most recent book, which is quite a tribute. As you think about engagement in today's world where many people work remotely, others work some hybrid situation between being in an office and being on Zoom, and yet there are still others who are full-time on corporate campuses and in corporate buildings. As you think about this blend we have in the American workplace today, what are some of your thoughts on engagement and culture? And have you witnessed or experienced difference from pre-pandemic to where we are today?
Great question, and a big resounding yes. So I recently gave a talk about how to create an engaging hybrid workplace, because a lot of my colleagues and people in my network would say, well, we're back in person. We have to go in twice a week. And I dress up, suited and booted. I get on the highway for an hour, and I just go into the office and do the same emails and the same Zooms I would do from home, because there's not many people there.
True
Why
enough.
am I doing this? And it's a really fair question. And so the first thing is, I think having a way for people to meet in person from time to time is positive whenever possible. I was saying this years before the pandemic, when I would be working with clients who had, for example, the sales department was at corporate in San Diego, and then they had production right across the border in Mexico. It's literally a 1-hour drive. And I would hear about all this dysfunction that they had. And sales would be calling, and people wouldn't pick up the phone, or the way that they spoke was unfortunate. And I asked casually, well, what happens when you are in person? Do you talk about this? Oh, we've never met. And so there is something so powerful about creating those relationships. And if there is an instance where people could do it and really build, then all of this technology we have is wonderful. So the same thing I said pre-pandemic, I'm saying post is we have to create time for those relationships. And when there is a hybrid approach where you have to go in once or twice a week, I would say try to do it with your team, so it's on the same day and you're all meeting in person. And one of the things I always talk about is no status meetings, because a lot of things could be shared over, the platforms you're using or email. And how can you use the minds and brains and hearts of everyone in that group together? And when you bring people together, decide if it's going to be a team learning, a group coaching, team building, problem solving, idea generating, and to in advance let everyone know what the topic is, share an article or so if that's important to it, so that everyone comes in fresh, prepared, and you are really gathering the collective wisdom from the group and bringing out the best in them. And so when you're able to do this, when you have a hybrid approach, it really complements all of the work that everyone is doing virtually.
Such a great approach. You reminded me of a few examples. One of my colleagues recently started a role as chief people officer at a company, and was instructed by her boss, the CEO, that she needed to be in the office at least for the first 6 months so that people could get to know her and employees would have some experience of her. And she reported that, she was seeing the same two people every day that she went into the office because no one else was there. And I also think about earlier in the pandemic where one colleague reported the unfortunate situation of having her employment terminated by her boss via Zoom, who was sitting literally an office door away from her. So this ability to connect, I really appreciate your examples about how to make that possible. And as we think about bringing more of who you are to what you do and bringing your best to every situation, for me, a lot of that is around integrity and alignment. That do your actions match your words, and even better, do your thoughts, words, and actions match? In a world where there's often high degrees of cynicism about organizational life, how do we start to make this real and authentic again for people?
Well, one of the things that is so important for people and organizations is that the actions match the words. The walk the talk is so critical. And so many times when I have culture assessments, I find that people will say, gosh, we hear these great talks that our leaders give telling us how to be, how to show up with customers, and then they don't walk the talk. And it's so disengaging. And I have 3 models in my book, A Powerful Culture Starts With You. And the third model, it's for senior team members. It's called Walk It. And the first step is walk the talk. Make sure you're all completely aligned. I don't care how much, behind the doors you are debating and in disagreement. And at the end, whatever you all come up with, you should never throw the idea of another colleague, whether it's the CMO, the CIO, the CEO, CFO, never throw them under the bus or say, well, that's his thing, or that's what she wants to do, we'll just do it. Fully support one another and make it and make it aligned with the values. Make sure you're continually looking at your culture and tracking everything. So the walk the talk is something that is good for us. It's good for people when they can see that what is being said on that beautiful video on the website is actually true. And on occasion, most times when I meet people and I tell them I'm an organizational psychologist, most times they'll say, oh, we need you in our messed up company. But once in a while, I'll have someone say, I love my company. And it brings such joy to my heart. And I know that came from so much effort and work and really going out of their way to make sure that there's clarity in what the company is there to do. There's a sharing of vision. There's making sure people have the resources and tools and support to do their best work. I just read on a research by Fortune magazine that half of people today who are being brought on when they're going on to their companies and they're not onboarded properly, half of them have decided they're not going to stay very long.
And check out from day one.
Day one is when you have a chance to bring people on and make sure that they have a buddy, they know the vision. Can I share an acronym I made for this for
Sure.
a video I'm going to be making? So it's a fresh start that you want to give them all, right? Fresh is the acronym. And F is facilitate an open, inclusive culture. So in this organization where someone is fresh, show them that everyone has a chance to meet and speak in meetings. Make sure you go around the room and have every person speak, not just those with management roles or those who are more extroverted. Create a coaching culture. And then the R is revise your standard operating procedures. And yes, it's boring. It's boring work, but it's very important so people can go through it and practice what some of the very basic things are and then ask questions. E is engage buddies and mentors for your new hire. Starting a new job is in the top 10 of life stressors. And if you have this sort of culture where you are saying, well, they'll sink or swim, survival of the fittest, that's not a way to keep employees, right? And you could sometimes leaders will say, be gregarious, get out there, introduce yourself to other people. Some people are more introverted. Some people feel awkward approaching someone that they have no idea who this is. So when you engage buddies, the person is brought in by a person that is known and has credibility. The S of fresh, share the vision, values, and strategy. What are we doing here? How are we doing it? How do we live our values? And then H, you'll appreciate this because this definitely has to do with authenticity. The H might be a bad word in corporate America, handhold. The H of fresh is handhold while the person is learning the culture, meeting new people and customers, and orienting. And that means checking in once in a while. Do you have the tools and resources you need? Do you have any questions? What have you observed? What's going well? What's challenging? And guess what? It's not forever. It's for a little while, and it shows who you are as a company and a culture. And guess what? That person, when a new person comes in down the road, will be happy to handhold because they'll know what that experience was like. So that's about making a fresh start.
It's refreshing. There is a certain beauty to that word of hand holding. One of my earliest mentors was Warren Bennis, who wrote a number of books on leadership, some best-selling books on leadership. And I think at his most cynical, he said that never has so much been written about so little. And yet, when I hear the term hand-holding and I think about the world of leadership, I've also heard leadership defined as maybe just being two things: that you care about something, and that you do something about that care. And to me, when I hear the word hand holding, I take that connotation. I take, I'm showing somebody that I care and I'm acting in a way that demonstrates that care. And I'm wondering, is that, what you intended in that hand holding part of the refresh metaphor?
Absolutely. It's someone, I have this other motto. I say, somebody cares, nobody cares. And a lot of times my husband and I, we talk about different organizations where he works and different clients I have. And that's what it comes down to. Either somebody cares or nobody cares. And when you have handholding, there is someone committed to caring for you at that moment where you need it the most.
On the cover of your recent book, A Powerful Culture Starts With You, there is an image, a wonderful image of a tree and roots. It's quite lovely. And I think
hands. There's hands all over it. Yeah.
And as guests, as our listening audience pursues your website at strategymeetsperformance.com, they'll also see some images of trees with roots. And tell us about that connection.
Sure. So I've always been enthralled with trees. And I think about how deep their roots are in the earth to the point that they ruin piping, but that's another story. But how deep they run, how they're able to sustain themselves with the water beneath the earth, and how they provide us with so much, with shade, with beauty, with greenery. And I think about when you see the video images of a storm, those trees, not the ones that got uprooted, but the trees that they're swaying, but they still stand. And one of the things I say to my clients is, how can you be deeply rooted in this difficult situation you're in, like a tree, and not get uprooted, not get pulled out? And one of the other things I say is we need to be rooted and growing, rooted in our experiences and our wisdom and what brought us to this point, and still continue to be growing. And culture is a living organism that we have to tend to and grow every day. And it's not a one-time deal to have a training, a strategic planning. And again, it was all going back to the metaphor of growth for me.
And Dr. Nooravi, you're a business psychologist, as you've identified, but you're also a master certified coach and founder and CEO of your business strategy meets performance. As you think about or consider all of your experiences, um, what are some of the attributes you notice with authentic leadership, with this, it starts with you, which is just, I love that expression. Um, what are some of the attributes that you notice in that of people who take that on to bring their whole selves to work?
One attribute of authenticity is deep listening and listening to understand, not listening so that you could speak and give a response. And if you observe the most thoughtful leaders, they do a lot more listening than speaking. Another one is courage. I actually saw some research where I think it was 77 CEOs were interviewed, and they looked at the themes for the most important attributes. One of them was courage, and courage to stand up for what you believe, even when others may not. And I think that's a huge part of authenticity. Integrity, certainly, that walking the talk, that knowing you will do the right thing, even if it's so difficult. You could have the highest performer, and if that person is awful to people, they're always wonderful with customers, but is awful to your people, you have a decision to make. You coach up, you do your best to coach up, and if that doesn't work, you have a big decision to make. And I think that relates to integrity and authenticity. And the last thing I would say is how you bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization as a way of being, not just something you talk about and train on, which of course is critical, but how you show up. Are you making sure all voices are heard? Are you pointing out if someone speaks with a language that shows a bias against a gender, a person of a different culture? These are ways where your authenticity is role modeling what is important.
Sure, so powerful. And certainly what I think about and what I often work with clients on is that integrity is the whole cloth. It's the real deal. And people like experiencing the real deal when they're interacting with another individual. And so much of authentic leadership is based on trust. And do I trust you? And while we could both discuss how trust is built and how it's achieved, once it's lost or once it diminishes, it's very difficult to regain. And as you mentioned something earlier in our discussion on this podcast today, that it's a joy when you hear people describe that they love their job. It's sometimes what I hear, and I wonder if you've experienced this, given all of your experience in developmental sequences with folks, with learning and development, organization development, all the development aspects of organizational life. I have heard some describe, I love my boss, I hate my job, or I hate my I hate my boss, but I love my company. Have you ever seen this in your experience or heard expressions similar to that, where people feel real affinity to the person they work with, but not so much their work itself?
Yes, give me one moment. I am writing this down. Hate my boss, love my company. Or job, company or job?
Job.
Okay. And then love my boss.
Hate my company.
Hate my company. Okay. Yes, I see all of this all day long. And I have an example, a good one of a recent client I spoke with. So the hate my boss, love my job. I have a client I spoke with on Friday, and she was sharing with me how frustrating it is to work with a boss who doesn't give her real feedback. The boss will say, you need to improve your communication skills. That's what a few people said. And she'll say, okay, what should I do? Oh, I don't want to give away who said this feedback. And then she said, this boss only focuses on what's going wrong, doesn't really share what's going right. And I shared with her, what you would like from your boss is a nice, neat bento box where you get your information and you get it in the parts that you need. But what you're getting is a sloppy Joe. And I said, do you foresee your boss changing at any time? And she said, no, absolutely not. Then I asked, are you willing to manage up to maybe create some bento out of this situation?
What a great suggestion.
And I asked her, so how, because a lot of times, we could have a boss who has the best of intentions, but is spread too thin, doesn't have enough management experience, doesn't have enough patience, is trying to get a different role, a higher level role. So you're not their first priority. And the question is, how can you get what you need from them in the most efficient way possible, right? Because we could imagine this person is just on the run, not really trying to spend an hour with you. And so some suggestions I have, if you have a boss like that, is to ask, I would love it if you can give me tell me what are a couple things I did well on that project, and what are a couple suggestions you have. And then if they say, you can work on your communication, to ask, can you tell me what to stop doing and what I can start doing? Because I really want to put this into action. But when you say communication, it's very broad, and I really want to use it. So you're managing up, you're coaching up. And the other thing I shared with her, it's nice to get positive feedback. And the higher up we go, the less we will get it. Let's just own that now. Now, is that okay? No. I've worked with the highest level VPs, and one time I was writing a note for the CEO to send out before the holidays, and he said, "Oh, can you send me a note from his email? So even though I know it's not from him, it would make me feel better that someone cares that I'm doing a good job." So we all care, and here's the thing: how do we decrease that dependence on that positive affirmation from that person? Right? If you know you're doing a good job and other people know you're doing a good job, there's this part of it to not be so dependent on it as well. So that's for the hate my boss, love my job. The love my boss, hate my job. I would say there are always opportunities to look in your organization to see where else you might be serving a role that is productive and efficient and that is more aligned with your strengths. I had a client who was ready to quit. And as I had gotten to know her better and her strengths, I was asking, I wonder how you could apply that within your organization, because she was thinking of leaving and starting her own company, but she didn't want to because of the stress and the risk. And I said, why can't you start a side gig, keep this role that you have, and see where else you can use your skills, and come into your organization and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes, as if you are being, as if you're serving as an internal consultant. What things would you suggest? How would you serve the company different? And I've had so many people stay in their companies and become happy because they're able to change out of their roles.
It certainly is a way that of thinking about career and how do you grow career. Is it that you imagine vertical advancement is the only way to go, some horizontal growing in place, so many different ways to approach the development topic. Your work relies so much on agency and taking personal agency. For me, sometimes when I'm promoting work, I have a background screen that leadership begins with self-awareness. And as you think about agency and agentic behavior, and what are some of the attributes of successful leaders that you've observed? Are there any common themes, beyond the uniqueness of the individual system or property?
It's taking personal accountability in any situation. Even if it's a situation that was not of your doing, the question is, how can you make an impact? Who can you share your voice with? Can you bring a group together to share their voices? Maybe you're the problem. How can you be so humble? And in my Watch It model, one of the letters of H is handle your ego. Is if you ask for feedback and there's things that you don't like, because that will happen, how can you be so humble and decide, I'm just going to take this in and reflect on it and see what my part is? So I think accountability is so much of it.
Such an interesting
openness and accountability.
Such interesting observations. I think of a recent client situation where I asked this powerful individual if he, she, or they could put aside their ego for the current trajectory of the company, which was on a very different path to when they raised all the capital for the organization 20 years ago or so. And it is a way of beginning to think about the role of ego in executive work, and such an important topic that you're introducing to our audience, and how to think about the role of ego. Because many who aspire to, not many who aspire, certainly aspire, but also who end up in positions of great responsibility, I think sometimes forget about accountability. And where it sits, somebody else will do it, or I don't have to worry about it, or it's good enough. And I'm wondering, have you seen or observed or worked with clients like that? And what does that say about how they show up and how they, achieve that intersection that you so wonderfully described as strategy meeting performance?
I'm
sorry, that's a big question.
It's so good though. When you lead in a way that people are afraid to give you feedback, that's the danger zone. Because there's always people around you who are smart, and they're seeing you and they're observing you. And if you were brave enough to ask them what they see, you would save yourself so much grief and so much chit chat, water cooler chit chat, people being disengaged, stress, because all that is going to come. And if you're not open to hearing about it, that's where you're in the danger zone. It is that openness to be able to get feedback, because when you don't, there's a lot going on that you don't know about that's going to affect the organization. And ego can take over when you believe everything is okay and you just want to keep it in that place, versus being open to get some bad news and trusting that you are going to be able to fix it.
Your insights and observations and wisdom can be found in many different places: San Diego Business Journal, Huffington Post, La Jolla Light. And as you think about the next steps that an individual would take relative to improving performance to meet strategic needs, are there certain actions that an individual would need to take?
Sure. So I wrote my book in a way to make culture really practical and understandable, because over the years, so many leaders I would give talks, and so many CEOs and C-suite would say, I have a sense of what a good culture is. I think there's a lot of things good with my culture, but I'm going to ask you, tell me what to do. And so I created a 3-model approach, and all 3 models are extremely practical. They could be downloaded at apowerfulculture.com. The first one, Watch It, is how to look at your culture with a fresh set of eyes. And there's steps for each one. And I have 4 checklists, ways to look at your culture from the group dynamics perspective, the employee experience perspective, the physical environment, the communications that go out from the top. The second one, Drive It, is a coaching model. So if you want to create a way for people to coach one another and just continually give feedback, the Drive It model, which is downloadable, has steps for every part of the model. And these are all about helping people discover their best selves and how they can get out of their own way. The third model, Walk It, is how to align your senior team. So these 3 models all have downloads, and they're all available on apowerfulculture.com.
Oh, that's great. We'll be sure to put that in the show notes as well. And so for those of you who are listening today, don't worry about taking some notes or that mental note. It'll be in the show notes. There are words as I, reflect on A Powerful Culture Starts With You. And the metaphors and analogies that you use, and those words are about wisdom and power and resilience and grace. And you describe those on your strategymeetsperformance.com site at times. But just for, as we begin to think about concluding, why those words, wisdom, power, resilience, grace? They're very powerful. Some of them are older words as well. I mean, they resonate with an antiquity like grace.
Yeah. So in my life journey, one of the things that I want to do as I get older is be one of those people who actually gets wiser. And every situation I encounter that is challenging or difficult that I prevailed through, whether at work or at home in my community, I want to grow wiser. So wisdom was one. Power is, how do we tap into our personal power? And a lot of times we think we don't have it, and we do. Resilience comes from my study of mindfulness over the years and how we can work on being present instead of stuck in the past with anxiety or future with anxiety. And grace is the grace we give to one another and to ourselves. And there's so many situations where we could embarrass someone or speak out to someone. And the question is, how do we do it in a way that shows grace, that saves face? And these are my personal values. These are my company values. These are values that I share with my clients because I think they are holistic and they relate to all aspects of our lives. And I highly encourage everyone to create your own values. Maybe these resonate with you, but every tough situation you're in, you could ask yourself, how am I living to these values?
Yeah, I always think about values as both a springboard and a reservoir, and they help you do both things in life. And just as we, begin to wrap up, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best place for them to reach out to you?
Great, thank you. Yeah, my website is Strategy Meets Performance. My email is Shahrzad, SHAHRZAD @Strategy Meets Performance. And for downloads for my book, go to apowerfulculture.com.
And we'll have all of those in the show notes for today's episode. Dr. Nooravi, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the depth, for the steadfastness that you bring to organization development and coaching and leadership development. I appreciate that. It really comes through in the podcast. So for all that you do and all who you are, thank you. So until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horne.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change Podcast.